You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. On our podcast, the goal is not just to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon and talk about what we're learning and what God is doing in us and in our community. The conversation you're about to join was inspired by our Lent sermon series for 2024. I am, letting Jesus be who he says he is. In this series, we're looking at Jesus' I am statements in the Gospel of John as we seek to gain a fuller picture of who God is. You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
With us today is the smart, the funny, the talented, the easily distracted, my friend, my brother, Adriano. And we are just so happy to have him on the podcast. He's been leading worship for us for
a year and a half.
Year and a half?
Yeah, a little bit over, I think.
Wow.
About like 7 months, so over.
Yeah, a year and a half. And that'll be a great opportunity for everyone to get to know him, because he's usually on stage and dealing with the band and stuff. And so now we're bringing him down to the people via the podcast. And so I was just curious. I've heard a plethora of wonderful stories from your childhood. But if you could try and sum up or describe what your childhood was like, how would you do so?
I was born in California. My dad was in the military, so we ended up moving over here, lived in Philly for a bit, went to a Roman Catholic school in Northeast Philly called St. Tim's, and then eventually St. Ed's. And I hopped around schools a lot, especially at a young age, for various reasons. Then I started going to Washington Township for about 2 years. I went to Paul VI for like 2 years. Went to Washington Township. When I was at Washington Township, I was taking courses at Rowan and really focused on music. I was a huge football and lacrosse guy, and kind of like sports and all that other stuff. But I actually messed my knees up pretty bad doing a lot of those heavy hitting sports. Plus, I put myself into it a little too hard, probably, at that age. Then I really focused mostly on music. Not that I hadn't before. I've kind of been doing music like since I was real young. I remember the first thing I played was a card that my grandfather had that was like one of those new things that came out. You open up the card and it had music play. Like it was When the Saints Go Marching In, actually. So I listened to that and I played it, and then had an ear for music. I started following that, did a lot of classical music growing up. So I studied at Settlement Music School, and then I took courses at Rowan. I also took theory courses at Settlement, and then I went to Berklee College of Music, and then, out of that I went and started teaching. I met Heather.
And the rest is
history. Yep. Just all went downhill from there, and I'm kidding. I love Heather is absolutely amazing. She saved my life in a lot of ways. So I'm always going to, she is the best part of me, I guess. And she's the one that actually brought me back to the church, because for a long time I was kind of not happy how I was treated, or every time I went into a church, I just wasn't always accepted. And I mean, being a musician, sometimes we kind of have that, I guess, rocker vibe and heathenist type of, but
well, so I'm gonna stop you there, because through even just your school lineup, there's a lot of saints included, and so I'm curious: was it St. Tim's or was it St. Timothy's?
It was St. Timothy, but
okay, because I also feel like that would be such a Philadelphia thing that the official name would be St. Tim's and St. Ed's.
Yeah, St. Timothy.
And so we got a lot of saint schools, a lot of Catholic schools, and I'm curious, were you raised Catholic, or were you just sent there because they were like, they can make you better behaved?
No, that didn't help. So, to be honest, no. It felt like a lot of times it was expected of them to be religious or Christian in that sense. But, I mean, every once in a while we would go to Easter. I don't think I've ever really been to a Christmas service when I was younger. And, it was more of like kind of put up a front, I guess, of, I'm a Christian. But I don't think, when I looked around, I don't think anybody really acted like a real Christian. through most of my younger years. Yeah, when it came to St. Timothy's or St. Edward's, I had a lot of questions. I was always one of those. I mean, I would ask a bunch, but it was always kind of just like, well, we don't ask that, or it's like it didn't have an answer for it, so I was in the wrong. Kind of made me go, all right, you know what? If nobody wants to answer anything, so I'm just going to go do my thing. And I actually remember music being a pretty big part in that, even though if you've been to a Roman Catholic church, the music isn't always like kind of blow you away. It was sometimes a little odd, and I kind of liked that. I know there was this one nun, she wrote a lot of things, and she wrote different ways of singing doxology, which was interesting. Huh. But it was like, now that I think back on it, it was very like old. Like ancient style of writing where it was not necessarily how do I say this? Where it wasn't the equal temperament. It was kind of like the old style temperament. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like basically microtonal in a lot of ways. So
like a Gregorian chant.
Yes, but not quite that old. Like it was a little after that actually, but it had some kind of actually if I think about it. And it really did. And from there, I started kind of just making stuff up. I used to be really heavy into poetry. Like Edgar Allan Poe was one of my favorites. I was actually told by a teacher not to read that, but I was like, I'll read whatever I want. So, and it was funny because they actually told my parents I shouldn't be reading that. And it's like, he's reading. What do you want him to do? So I read a lot of that, and actually the first piece I wrote was through The Raven from Edgar Allan Poe. So I wrote an entire, I scored it out. I actually wrote it down. I have it on I probably can't find anything that can read it on this format, but it's an old school, kind of thick, not floppy, a little bit thicker than that. It was like a zip drive. Yeah.
The floppy disks that weren't floppy. Yeah.
So, and that was on that, and it was an old notation program that was kind of out at the time. So I don't even know if I could find that again. So that was the first time I started writing, and then I just kept going with it and making up things here and there. And then through that, I started questioning more what music was, and I organized it down to 3 things. It was initially just sound, not necessarily the organization of it, time, not necessarily the organization of it, and emotion. And then I was having a conversation with an artist, painter, and I forget where he was from, somewhere in Africa. I started telling him about this little theory of what music and arts to me were. And he told me the third one, before I even said emotion, he just said spirituality. And I was just like, wow, I never thought about that. And then I started going down that, and I was reading everything from Zoroastrianism to, and not that I haven't read the Bible when I was younger, but I started kind of searching around different areas. And then I started reading the Bible, and then I was working, found Heather, and she went and brought me to the church, and I made a joke, as I usually do, about, I was like, I don't know, I haven't been in a church in a long time, I might, start sizzling. And then I walked through the front doors and just went in her ear, and she just smacked me. So...
And that's why we love Heather.
That's why, yeah.
Smacking Aaron since 2000.
Yeah, it's been a while. We've actually been together for 12 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine.
So we've been married for 2, but we've been together for quite a bit. Yeah, she brought me to church, and then I started kind of getting more into it and realizing that church didn't have to be the same motions and the same thing. It actually gave you something to think about and something to strive for and spiritual understanding. It's basically how I got, I guess, here. I mean, I'm starting to...
So I got, oh my gosh, I could talk to you all day because I know you and I know things about you. But I guess one thing I'll start with is that when a lot of people hear the name Berkeley, they have all of these ideas or preconceived notions
in
of
California?
It.
No, it's not in California. That's when I was
And so I'm curious, what's one thing that you think the general public assumes about Berkeley that's true? And what's one thing that they would possibly never imagine about the school that you experienced?
There are a lot of great musicians. It's a lot of work. So obviously you're practicing. I used to practice about 8 to 10 hours a day, every day. But the one thing they don't always tell you is it's actually good to make connections with people as well. So you get to meet a lot of great musicians, but when you're in the practice room for 10 hours a day, it's not always, you get to meet them in class, you could talk, have lunch, all that other stuff, but sometimes you get stuck in that world that you just start focusing on, I guess, your craft, which is a great way to do that at that school. But Berkeley, it's a very liberal school. So, and you get a lot of that with teachers as well. Some of them are pretty straightforward, with you. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Whiplash. There are teachers that are like that. I don't think I've ever seen one to that intense degree, but there are teachers who can really push, and it borderlines. It gets nasty.
If you haven't seen Whiplash, amazing.
It's a great movie.
Go watch. Have you seen J.K. J.K. Simmons? That's his name, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Miles. Oh my gosh, so good.
So tell us a little bit more about the faith shift that happened when you started coming back to church. And you said kind of that you got there with Heather and then you ended up here, but like when did your faith kind of begin to come alive for you?
I was playing in a band quite a bit. We were trying to do as much as possible, playing for different people and moving out. And it was mostly around New York area, Paramus. We had our practice studio up there. I was doing that, and then weekdays, like just teaching, a lot of like private lessons. I was like the head of the department for this one place I worked. And then when Heather got to that place, we started talking, and I'm always cheesy, so I asked her out, and then we just started hanging out more and more. And then she mentioned that I should come to church with her. And that's where I was kind of like, every time I've gone to a church, a lot of times you step in and there's not always an acceptance sometimes. They're nice, but I never got, especially as a musician, there is kind of, it sounds weird, but when a musician steps in, a lot of people immediately are like, "Ooh, this is me, this is what I do," and they become very kind of possessive of that position. I don't know if you've ever seen something like that, but I've gone into a couple churches and it's been like that. So a lot of times if I go into another one, I just won't even mention, because people are a little bit more nice, I guess. So because I'll tell you, even from a young age, I always felt that I wanted to. I believe in Jesus. I believe in God. I believe in the Holy Spirit. And I've always felt led to lead in that sense. And music was kind of the thing I had to, something that I was just generally good at, became my tool. And I wanted to express that, and I wanted to learn. I wanted people to feel God the way I've always felt God. When I say I organized music into those 3 points, every time it always came back to the Holy Trinity to me. The all-knowing Father, of knowing if, myself knowing my craft well enough. So I simplified it down to its base points of what the sound in music actually is. It's just sound, and it's any sound that can be there, not necessarily the organization, like I said before, of the 12 tones that we have now that Pythagoras figured out like a majillion years ago. Not that long. But
which, for another time, if you see Aaron, ask him his theory and connection of the 12 notes and the 12 disciples, because it's fascinating. But I don't think we have time for that today.
So I'll start talking. I'll go down that rabbit hole for hours. But yeah, I understood that, and I just felt, when you hear just sound, whether you're outside and you're listening to the snow falling, or you hear the wind chimes, or you hear the leaves rustling, or the ocean, there is, if you leave space, and that's something I learned, if you allow that to linger, there's the Holy Spirit is there. And to allow that to come into yourself, it's a very emotional and very powerful thing. And I want people to experience that, and however they experience music, whether they like the jazz aspect where I'm focused on all of the complexities and what this is doing and what mode did they go into, and why did they choose this note. That a lot of thought. Sometimes it just comes down to like what you were feeling at the moment. Maybe it was a thought, but you took the risk and you jumped into it and it was beautiful. Or it's the ambient music or whatever. There is always something, and that's what I really wanted to bring to people. So when I came into the church, Heather, we would have little conversations here and there, and she's always completely open to answering any questions, or even, having little debates about, what I was thinking, what she was thinking. And she always brings it back to the Bible, and that was great for me. So yeah, my spiritual journey, it was, I guess, having the bravery to step up and say that I am a Christian. Because sometimes, especially in the musical sense, you say that and people are like, ooh, and you get a lot of that pullback. And then especially in a very liberal school like that, you don't find like-minded people in that regard at all. So then when you go into a church and you're trying to find that as well, and you are met with the this is my position type of thing, it kind of disheartens you a little bit. But, with Heather was very much the same way where we went to church before. And eventually we were just allowed in. It just led me to where I am now and experiencing God daily, every time I read or every time I just be. And it's just, I don't know, it's great.
Yeah. And that's something that I love and admire about you and how your brain works, is that you see God in places where I feel like most people would overlook him. And sometimes people, like when you express some of those ideas of where you've seen him, they need it to line up to be an exact, like, perfect metaphor for God, or be like theologically sound, every single detail and note of it, where I think just the general connections are so beautiful. And also, like, are they looking for those connections in their everyday, the intricacies of their day-to-day life? Mm-hmm. And that's where, like, even this past young adults retreat in the fall, we got to talk in our little group, and you were sharing about, like you just said, about in the day-to-day, in the silence, and reading, not just reading the word, but other things you're reading, or when you're creating music or listening to music, that you're seeing and hearing and feeling the Spirit in so many different avenues that I think we would overlook, or the majority of us would overlook. And I think that's a real strength of yours. And you even touched on saying God kind of in the space, and that's something that you learned and heard about at the thing you guys went to. So what was the thing you guys went to?
Yeah, so at the end of February, Aaron and I had the opportunity to go down to Asheville, North Carolina, to attend the New Room Leaders Gathering, which was a gathering of almost 500 people. There were pastors and youth and young adult pastors, worship leaders, people involved in doing ministry in the marketplace, and people who were involved in leading prayer within their church. And so we had the opportunity to go down there, and I participated in the pastor's track. Aaron participated in the worship leaders track. But Aaron, what were some of the big kind of takeaways that really stood out to you from our time down there at the gathering?
There's one that really hit me, and it wasn't anything that they said. It's just when we were all praying together, and I just looked up, and everybody is moving, kind of in unison, and I immediately saw just us as wheat in a field and blowing. And it was great because the prayers, the simple things that they were saying were the rustling of that wheat to me. There were just subtle whispers. and then immediately brought me back to when I was younger in a field in California somewhere, putting coins on a railroad track with my dad. And it was just like that wind, that breeze that's rustling the grass. It was kind of like saying that God was always there. You know, it was just a beautiful image that came out, and that one hit me. I got a little emotional that night. So, yeah, I'm just getting a little emotional now just thinking about it. But it was a beautiful moment. And then, of course, the knowledge and the things I have to learn for myself, like letting things sit. It's still something I'm working on. I really want to bring that out. And I guess the musician in me kind of says, all right, you need these tones and you need to do this and you need to do that. Like, I will admit, I am not a huge fan of the way the keyboard sounds. That's just me. And it's something it's something I want to adjust. I just have to figure out how to do that. But sometimes just letting something sit and moving around and saying a verse over and over again, it's like practice, And I tell this to my students a lot. Practice is annoying. I'm not going to lie. It's the same thing over and over again. You're going to get frustrated. The metronome is just going to be clicking in your ear the whole time, and that's going to cause anxiety and annoyance. Recognize that. Take a breath and overcome it, but keep it going. Don't stop. So when we sit there and we say a phrase several times, don't just, think, oh man, we just repeated this 5 times. And that's something I tend to be like, the perfection of music. Let's only repeat it this many times because otherwise it's going to get annoying and you're going to annoy people. And especially in writing, right? Sort of like the song that doesn't end from Lamb Chop, that little thing, so it gets annoying real quick. But sitting there and saying the same thing and singing the same thing with the congregation, don't just focus on the repetition of it. Focus on the smaller things within it, whether it's a single word or a group of words, or if I were practicing, my finger isn't doing something that I want it to do, so I'm going to focus on that finger and make sure that it does. Is it loud enough? Is it soft enough? Let it move within there, and the repetition of it isn't as annoying now. Now it becomes a focus of what it is you're saying. And that was the letting it linger thing kind of helped me realize that as well.
Oh, that's great. I would say a couple things that come to mind when you talk about like the wind and the we of how like we literally talked about this, I think this week, if not Saturday, it was Sunday. And you felt the cold wind from the basement come up. And I was like, the word wind and spirit in Hebrew and in the Greek are the same word. Mm-hmm. In each language, the same word. And so like to that imagery of like the spirit moving amongst you as you guys are praying. And even earlier in the week, I was listening to, I can't keep track of what I listened to, but I was listening to something and I was talking about the meekness of Jesus and meek, but not mild, in the sense that like the power behind God and yet intentionally reserving it back as he was human. And so when you think of like that gentle breeze, the spirit meeting us gently and that, but could have the force of a tornado and yet holds that back for us.
Have you ever heard where the word meek or meekness originated?
No.
That had to do with horses and training horses. And they would talk about a horse's meekness as the ability to take all that power that a horse has and bring it under control and direction. And I always thought that was a great way to think about the meekness of Jesus. All that power he had, and he was able to bring it under control of God's will.
Are we going to learn how to tame a stallion today?
We would do a video podcast for that one.
Not for me. And then in the latter thing you mentioned of the repetition, and I don't need to repeat it because you explained it so beautifully. What was amazing to me at Passion this year, if you hadn't gotten the chance to listen to the podcast, our college kids talked about it, that on, I think it was our last day, we did Agnes Day. We did that like bridge, holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty. Mm-hmm. Yep. For, I believe, a cappella, no band, no singers, around 17 minutes of that on repeat, the 55,000 college students that were there. And they finally posted the video, and now it's on their live album, so the full version's like 19 minutes something or whatever. And it was just like organic. It was just so organic the way that it happened. And like you said, kind of like feels annoying, but then you have to focus on it. And so by like the 30th repetition, I was like, okay, drummer or like keyboard, someone come back in so we can close this out. And then by the 40th repetition, I was crying in worship, because like I had to fully absorb and acknowledge the truth behind what I was singing. And that was really powerful. A song that I'd known, 20 some years and sung many a times, and I knew the lyrics, but like to know in the core of my heart it to be true. And then having like the worship leaders literally like, it made me think like Old Testament, because they fell on their face, not literally fall as in like trip, but like two of them ended up just laying down on their stomachs and just worshiping, and the others were on their knees praying. And I think that's part of like what the album cover is. But
well, yeah, and it takes it like on a journey from singing it to acknowledging what you're singing to knowing it, not just in your head, but like in a deep experiential kind of way. And then at some point it shifts into proclaiming it and confessing it. And if you're not paying attention, you might just say, well, they're just singing it all those times. But there's something that happens when we repeat something and we just hold on to that truth that then shifts it from just singing it to the point where we're confessing it, and there's a connection with God in the midst of it. That doesn't always necessarily happen when you just sing through a hymn and you sing each verse and move on. I love hymns. I think they have a beautiful place in worship, where Aaron and I were talking about, even incorporating some more hymns into our second service while we were away. Because that was one of the things that really stood out to me in the way that the different teams led worship, was there's just this seamless flow between very modern and contemporary songs and old hymns and even older choruses like I Love You, Lord, and Sanctuary, and the way they were just all kind of flowing in together felt very right. Yeah. Even though we think, well, if we're going to do a contemporary service, we've only got to do songs that were written in the last 5 years. But there's a reason that some of those older songs and some of the hymns, have stuck around for so long, because of the truth that they contain and the way they allow us to express that truth.
And even at Passion, that was one thing I'd mentioned before, I was so happy that their opening like communal worship song was The Heart of Worship, which is like 20 plus years old. And then after Louis' message, I think the hymn we sang was Oh, the Wonderful Cross. And so like when you think of that audience of 18 to 25 year olds, you assume it's all the new radio like Christian music. And so to have that be a part of it, it doesn't make people shy away from contemporary worship. Do you have something you want to add?
No, I mean, for that, no. But when I was thinking, when you were talking about the repetition, and I started thinking about, again, how I explain that when we watch long distance runners. People who don't know how to run the long distance are always tense. It's crazy when our brain has to focus on something. We tend to tense that thing. And you see it in little kids. If I put their hands on the piano, all of a sudden, and their hands get really tight. And I'm like, just loosen up, right? That's... but you have to, it's not something I can tell them to do. It's something that repetition and the pain of it, you have to kind of break yourself a little bit, whether it's physically by tiring your hands out or running 10 miles or something that gets you to learn that. I mean, even the spirituality of just sitting there and lingering in worship for a long period of time will break down those mental barriers and those walls that you set up for yourself, because it gets exhausting holding them up all the time. And then once you realize, either your body realizes it or your mind realizes it, it lets go of a lot of those things. And then that's why when we look at somebody do something that they've done millions of times, it looks effortless. But then when you try it, it's just like, nah, it went all out the window. You know, it's just nothing. This doesn't make any sense. I don't know why my hands aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I've seen this person do it. But it just really is, you haven't done it. And you have to consistently do it until you, again, like I said, break yourself in some way. But then when you start recognizing where the pain is, and this is what I talk about in hands, I point out their joints or their fingers. A lot of times kids will point to their fingers when they say something hurts. And I'm like, okay, it's because that part's tense. It's not because the muscles are in there. There's no muscles in your fingers. It's just tendons, and like there aren't. You can look it up. They're all tendons.
What?
Freak out a little bit.
Then what's all this little fat pudgy stuff?
That's just fat pudgy stuff. You need to work it up.
I thought like if I like worked out my hand, the fat would turn into muscle.
No.
Not your forearms.
Yeah, it's all forearms, and up here, if you see the wiggle, it's kind of gross. But
What?
yeah, that's where the motion comes from. Yeah.
Okay.
There are some. I'm not saying there's not in your hand. We've got a muscle over here that can.
It's in the palm, but not in the fingers.
Yeah, that's for your pinky, and that'll tire out. Same thing with your thumb muscle here. But anyway, they point to something that is only painful because of the stress and the tension that they're putting on their hands. And then eventually that pain just starts moving up, and it gets into here, and it starts working its way up into your forearm more. That's the purpose of repetition to me. Yes, your focus can go around and move the things, but it's also, again, breaking yourself out of those little ruts that you kind of got yourself into right when you first started.
And so, Scott, I'm curious, what were some highlights for you from this conference? Besides getting to spend more time with Aaron.
Which is the best part.
Besides getting to spend 3 solid days with Aaron, which isn't entirely true because we did have their breakout sessions separate. Mm-hmm. I think some of the highlights for me were, one, being in a room like that with other leaders who have been through some of what I'm going through now, who are currently going through similar things to what I'm going through now, and all of us being there not to get, here's the next program you need to start at your church, or here's how you reach this demographic of people in your community. It wasn't that kind of a conference. It was leaders who have a heart to see God move, not just within their congregations, but within our communities, within our nation, around the world, and to see people seeking after that. So that was kind of the first one. The second one, I think, would be just the way God showed up for me in very real and personal ways. You know, we experienced this a little bit at New Room in September. You expect going to a big conference, it's going to kind of pump you up and get you excited and, you know, ready to charge the hill again. But it was more introspective at times, more reflective, more repentant. We had times where we were called to acknowledge the things in our lives that still are getting in the way of what God wants to do. We had times when we were asked to, open ourselves up and ask God what he needs to awaken in us if he's going to bring awakening within our churches. And the way God showed up for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, so I don't want anyone to think like it was something special about me, but God was showing up for people in some really beautiful ways. And one of the things he was saying to me was, I want you to become more of a person of prayer. And I pray.
Thank God.
You've all heard me pray.
For a while.
For a while, right? It's not something that I'm afraid to do. It's not something that I'm reticent to do. But he said, one of the guys was talking, he's like, you can't start a prayer room or a prayer ministry at your church. You have to create a culture of prayer. And one of the things God was saying to me was, I want the culture of your heart to be one that's more a culture of prayer. And one time we were praying, so okay, what does that need to look like then? Jesus, ever so kindly but firmly, said, I want your 6 a.m. I hate getting up in the morning. I hate it. Like, there are morning people and there are night people. I'm not a morning person whatsoever. And he just kind of put it out there. He wasn't demanding it. He wasn't making it an obligation. You want to become a person of prayer? Here's what I want. I want your 6 a.m.
Like, okay, but at 6:01, I'm going right back to sleep.
The next day, in a subsequent thing they were working us through, they asked us to pray, like, God, what do you want to awaken in me? And the answer I heard was, I want to awaken a passion for prayer. Mm-hmm. Like, not that this 6 a.m. commitment was to become an obligation or a duty, to get me to the next level or whatever, but that he wanted to awaken in me a passion for that would make that 6 a.m. time a life-giving thing. And so it was some other stuff that I won't get into on a podcast. Yeah, it was just such a sweet time that wasn't a rah-rah, charge the hill kind of thing, but ministered to my heart and my soul in a way where coming back, I feel like I've got not necessarily an excitement to continue moving forward, but just a steadfast resolve to follow God wherever he wants to take these next days, weeks, months.
So for Aaron, I guess the last question I have for you would be, what are you excited about coming up with FUMC within the music ministry, outside of the music ministry? What are you excited about coming up, short term, long term?
I always say this. I like to see where it's even come from the year that I've been here. It's just, I don't know, getting to know people and just seeing, I guess, there a lot of change happening for good is what I like to see, I mean, if you go down in the basement, I used to go in there and it'd just be stuff, just a lot of stuff, and it's great. But, having rooms to do different things and different stuff that we need for, like the food pantry and all that, that's awesome. Without it taking up the space that people have to do other things, and I like that type of growth. And of course, I would love to implement, some of the stuff we talked about during the conference, just bringing that in, and I am excited to try it. A little nervous because with trial comes failure, and I don't want to fail all the time, but sometimes you got to just jump out there and see how it works. It's an excitement and a nervousness, I suppose, like something that kind of gets me a little antsy, but I'm liking the way we're going, and I just want to see, after everything is all said and done, where we stand and how we could build from that point forward is really what I'm looking forward to seeing.
Well, that's our conversation for today, but that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.